come on, come. Where are all the children? Come on. Let's have you. No, I don't want to do it. Have a seat. Sit down over here. Any more? On the ground and face me. Sit down on the ground and face me. There we go. Any more? Why don't you have any 90-year-olds? They always tell me they're school children. You know what we did last night? Do you have any idea? Well, what we did is we celebrated Easter a whole day earlier, because we normally do it on today. But what happened is the family was so busy with things that we decided to have it last night. And here we go. Do you want to see a photograph of my grandchildren? There's a photograph of my grandchildren, all sitting down on their own table so that they can have their nice Easter meal. There it is. Can you see that? That's great. And you know what they did then? Is they did a Easter egg hunt. And I got to hide some of the Easter eggs away, but you know what I did? I hid one in an easy spot, and I hid one in a very, very difficult spot. And guess what? I couldn't find it afterwards. Because when I hid it away, it was nice and light, and when they went looking for it, it was dark. But we eventually found it. But it was better than my son, who's the father of two of my grandchildren. He forgot completely where he had hidden one, and we all had to search for it for ages, but they found it. But you know what the hit was? They were given one of the Easter eggs. They had a sort of a dinosaur's head that they could put on their hands. Have you ever seen one of those? I've seen them before. And inside the head was a little Easter egg. But what was unusual about this Easter egg is you could unfold it, and it was like a transformer. And it transformed into a dinosaur. Isn't that nice? And they loved it. But guess what they did with that head? You know, have you seen one of those dinosaur heads before? Well, I can show you the marks on my arms, because I got attacked by dinosaurs coming and chomping at my arms all the time. Do you think you're going to have an Easter egg hunt tonight, or at lunchtime? I think you might. And do you know what the significance is of those Easter eggs? Well, an egg is always a symbol of new life, of rebirth. And that's what's happening with Jesus. Today is the day where Jesus was resurrected. Remember, he was crucified on Friday, and he's been in the tomb, and what has happened is he's now been resurrected. But what we want to do is we want to look at our garden of repose. Can you see how nice it is in the corner? Can you see where I'm pointing? And that's wonderful. And right at the back over there, you can see the tomb, and if you look, you can see the stone, and there's the stone we rolled away. It's been rolled away. Oh, gosh. Because, you know, that's what happened. What happened on the third day is there were some ladies that decided to go back to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body some more. And as they were coming to the tomb, they said, but this stone is very heavy. How on earth are we going to manage to roll the stone away? But they needn't have worried, because when they got there, the stone was already rolled away. And they went inside, and in Mark's Gospel, you know what they saw? They saw no Jesus, but they did see a young man. A young man was sitting there. And that was a bit of a strange, they got quite a surprise. But in Jewish culture, a young man is often portrayed as an angel, or the other way around. An angel is often portrayed as a young man. So to Mark, that was the angel. And in the other Gospels, in John and Matthew and in Luke, they actually talk about angels themselves. So angels who had rolled the stone away, and they went in. And do you think if we went in there, what would we find? Is there a cloth in there? Does somebody want to go with heaven and see what's inside the tomb? That should be quite interesting, because the ladies, the women who went there had the stone rolled away. They went in, they saw the young man, but also what they saw inside the tomb. They expected Jesus' body to be there, because he had been buried there. But they didn't find that. I wonder what it was. Let's see what they can find. Let's have a look. What is there? Oh gosh. But what happened to Jesus? I thought Jesus was going to be in there. What did you find? Just cloth. things happened to Jesus. He's come alive again. The fancy word is that he's been resurrected. So he's been resurrected, and he's left behind him all the cloth. You can put it down here, thank you. Now, that cloth in those days was actually very expensive and cost a lot of money. But then it was left in the tomb, and Jesus was gone. So the angel, the young man, or the angel, says to them, but why are you here? Why are you looking for Jesus here? Jesus told you that he was going to go to Galilee, and he was going to meet you in Galilee. So what on earth are you doing here? You should be going to Galilee, so go back. Go back and tell all the other disciples to go to Galilee. Jesus is waiting for you in Galilee. And the angel said something very, very important. Don't look for Jesus amongst the dead. Look for Jesus amongst the living. Because Jesus is no longer dead. Jesus is alive at the resurrection. And that is our belief. Our belief as Christians is that Jesus was the first person who was brought back to life after being dead. And I'm going to talk to your parents a little bit more about that. That's what I must do. I must go and talk to your mummies and daddies now. You can stay here, but you know the photograph I forgot to show you? I forgot to show you my grandsons with their dinosaur heads, the ones that attacked me, and that lovely transformer little egg that they got that transformed into a sort of a dinosaur. I don't know, I've never heard of an egg transforming into a dinosaur. Have you heard of that before? You have? Oh, well, good. That's great. And they even had the dinosaur head. And you want to see my scratches? Because all night I got attacked by a dinosaur head. But I lived. It's all right. It's not a problem. I lived. Okay, so you can stay here. Can I go and speak to your mummies and daddies? Okay, let me do that if I can get up. Getting down is one thing, getting up again is another thing. I made it, all right, I made it up. So, now, moms and dads, your turn. So, where do we find this incident of the resurrection and the empty tomb? As I said, we find it in all four of the Gospels. In John's Gospel, he just records Mary Magdalene as going. In the other Gospels, in Mark, it was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, I think it was, who went there. The other Gospel writers, I think, just have two going there. But they all go there. They all go to see what is going on. Now, interesting. The angels are there. The angels tell them, go to Galilee. Why are you looking here? Go to Galilee. That's what Jesus told you. Why on earth are you looking here? Go to Galilee. That's where Jesus was. And of course, that's what they found. Now, an interesting thing in Mark's Gospel is Mark ended it right there. And you might remember that Mark was the first person to write a Gospel. So his Gospel is actually very short in comparison to the other ones. But he ends it in a very peculiar way. And we heard it read. So verse 8 goes like that. Like this. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And that's where Mark ends his gospel. What a miserable way to end a gospel, don't you think? I mean, surely you can end a gospel in a far nicer way than that. And guess what the early church leaders did? They said, yeah, we've got to sort this out. So they added things to it afterwards. If you look right at the end of chapter 16, you'll see, depending on the Bible version you use, there's a shorter version and a longer version that was added sometime afterwards. We're not 100% sure when, but your Bible would say it'll say words like this is an addition, or they'll say these words don't appear in the very early manuscripts of Mark's Gospel. So they were added probably somewhere in the 200s. That's the guess. But people actually aren't 100% sure when they were added. But our best bet is somewhere in the 200s. And of course that then was a far nicer way to end the gospel. They then spoke about the resurrection, and even the longer version even spoke about the ascension. A far better way, I'm sure you'll agree. You couldn't leave it like this. So there we go. Issues of faith. You see, we are challenged, aren't we, to believe things, and as 21st century people, we sometimes struggle with those things. Take something at Christmas time, we're asked to believe in the virgin birth. Now here we are at Easter, and we are asked to believe in the resurrection. Well, that's a problem, because we know that dead is dead. Can you be dead and not be dead suddenly? We talk about dead quite a lot, by the way. In English we use it. We go on a long hike and we come back and we're exhausted and we say, oh, I'm half dead. Or we have a particularly busy day at work and we say, I nearly died. Or something else happens and we say, oh, that almost killed me. So we use those terms all the time. But actually, when it comes to the crunch, dead is dead. There's no other thing. You're either alive or you are dead. Now, I know we have a problem with modern medicine because we often read about somebody dying on the operating table and they are technically dead and they get revived and come back to life. But that's normally after a very short period of time. That's normally after seconds or after maybe a minute or two, not 3 days, as is the case of Jesus. So what can we do if we talk about the resurrection? What can we say, what can we do that gives us some assurance that this resurrection story is true? Well, there have been lots of accusations. So all the people who say, no, this can't possibly be true, there have been lots of suggestions. I'm just going to look at 3 of them, because otherwise we could be here until supper time, and I'm sure we all want to have a lunch today, don't we? Just going to look at a few of them. One of the people, what some of the people say is, was it actually Jesus who was crucified? Or was some other poor guy just hauled out of the crowd and Jesus got let go, and it was some other poor person that got crucified? Well, who would have done that? Could it possibly have been his supporters who somehow managed to swap him? Well, if you read the Passion story, you'll see that there wasn't a second where Jesus was left alone. He went through that. He was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. He went through, was it 6 trials? I think it was 6 different trials, one after the other. Eventually, Pilate very reluctantly condemned him to death and handed him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. So he wasn't left alone for a second if we look at the readings. So it's unlikely that his followers could have done that. Remember also that his followers had scattered. They were gone. Peter had denied him 3 times. They were out of there. They were terrified that they were going to get arrested and suffer the same fate. So it's unlikely to have been his supporters. Could it have been Pilate? Remember, Pilate actually didn't want him to be crucified. He was very reluctant about that. And of course, what Pilate didn't want is he didn't want a revolution. He didn't want upset. Now, the Romans, if you wanted to conquer another country, it was the Romans you had to speak to, because that's what they did well. They went in, they conquered an area, they subdued it, and they took over, and they very often left a sort of a puppet government, but with a Roman governor to really oversee it and make sure everything was good. And that's what Pontius Pilate was. He was sort of the governor, and he had one command, and that was Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. That was his job, the peace of Rome. That's what the Roman authorities in Rome wanted. They didn't want to hear about any unrest. They didn't want to hear about any insurrections. They didn't want to hear about revolutions. And had there been one, it would have been a very bad mark against Pilate, and that's not what he wanted. So it's unlikely that Pilate had organized something like that. Well, what about the Roman soldiers? Maybe the Roman soldiers swapped him out for somebody else. And again, unlikely, because the Roman soldiers wouldn't have known him. They wouldn't have cared less who he was. And had they been caught, they would have been sentenced to death, quite probably. So the Roman soldiers wouldn't have wanted about it, wouldn't have worried about Jesus being at the cross at all. So was it Jesus himself who was crucified? Well, the logical answer is yes, because other answers actually don't make sense. The second one is, was he dead, or was he just severely injured? In other words, we know he was scourged, that means whipped, and often the scourging kills people. It's so severe. And he was hauled through the streets. He had to carry probably just the crossbeam on his shoulder. We know that he collapsed in our Stations of the Cross I think we have him collapsing about 3 times. They bring in Simon of Cyrene, and he has to help him carry the cross. He gets nailed to the cross with the nails through his hands, or they're saying it was probably through his wrists and through his legs, and he was hanging there. So, was he severely injured? Well, let's think about it. The Romans stuck a sword or a spear into his side just to check that he was dead, and they were experts in dead. Okay, a Roman soldier knew what dead was. So they were experts in it, and they said, this man's dead. The other thing is, had he just been injured, severely injured, I should imagine he would have been in intensive care for weeks, if not months, with what he had gone through. And yet, 3 days later, how do they work it out? People often say, well, you can't count properly, it isn't 3 days. Friday was the first day, that's how they started counting, the first day. Saturday was the second day. Sunday, even though it's early in the morning, was the third day. So 3 days, on the third day, he's resurrected and he's perfectly fine. You can show people the hands, the marks in his hands. You can show people the spear mark in his side. But otherwise, he's absolutely perfectly well. If he had been severely injured, he would have been in intensive care. I'm sure you would agree with that. The third and last thing is what we've got this morning. We've got the empty tomb, and the ladies arrive at the tomb. They find the stone rolled away. They walk in. They have an encounter in all 4 of the Gospels with an angel, or in Mark's Gospel with a young man who is an angel, and it's empty. All that's left behind are the linen to wrap up the body. Now, the way that they anointed the body in those days was do you remember one of the presents that was given to Jesus at his birth by the wise men? One of the presents was myrrh, and that was a foretelling of what would happen to him. They would need the myrrh at his burial. So now the myrrh is there, perfumes are there, oils are there, and his body is wrapped in linen, and this concoction, this liquid of perfume and oils is on him, and it's almost like paper mache. Have you ever built a mountain with paper mache? You put one layer on, and then you put another layer on, and you put a third layer on, and a fourth layer on, and that's what it would have happened, layer after layer after layer of these wrappings with Jesus. So, if somebody had come to steal the body, because that's what some of the ladies' first thing, somebody's stolen his body, somebody's taken his body away. If somebody had come to steal the body, they would have gone out of there with the linen as well. They wouldn't have spent time, because that would have taken time, unwrapping him from the linen and leaving the linen behind. And the linen was expensive, so that was worth money. If they were going to steal the body, they would have stolen the linen with it. But the linen was there, the body was gone. Now I love the Bible, because there are times when I find something in the Bible that actually I don't think I've ever read before, which is impossible. Of course I've read it, but I just haven't really registered in my poor little brain. And Heather gave us a challenge yesterday. She came and said she's just read that Jesus, when he came out, folded some of the linen as if to say, I'm done. That's what happened after a meal. After a meal, in those days, we do it the other way around nowadays. They fold all the napkins up, I suppose, and put it down, saying, I'm done, I'm finished. So I said, we can't remember that in the Bible. Where is it in the Bible? And of course, when I went to look, indeed it is. In John's Gospel, they talk about folded linen from the head is there. But I couldn't find any reference with Jesus folding it. What they seem to think instead is that folding, with it like being paper mache, is it formed like a body covering the whole lot, and particularly the head. So when Jesus got resurrected, he didn't sort of unwrap himself like a mummy, Egyptian mummy. He didn't sort of unwrap himself, he just came out of it. And we can see that on places like the day of Pentecost, where the disciples are in this little room with the door locked, and suddenly Jesus is there. Jesus appears amongst us, even though he wasn't there before and the door is locked. So was that the same with that? Did he simply come out and leave behind those embalming linen? Which is probably what happened. But it certainly wasn't stolen. They would have stolen the linen at the same time. So Heather, thank you for making us look and find some things that we hadn't seen before. And isn't that wonderful about the Bible? something like that I've read, but it just hasn't internalized until I see it. And quite often we have two important chunks with a bit in the middle, and suddenly it looks like we've never seen the bit in the middle because we're so intent on getting on to the exciting bits. So, what did John say? John 20. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been at Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place all by itself. And Paul said this in 1 Corinthians, if for this life only we have hope for Jesus, we are of all people most to be pitied. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died. For since death came through a human being, the resurrection of the dead has also come through a human being. And he carries on, ends that section with, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. So in Jesus' resurrection, death has been defeated. And that's our hope as Christians. Our hope as Christians is that death has been defeated, which means there is something after death. Death isn't the end. There is something after death. We don't particularly understand that something. We don't particularly know what that something is, but we have the hope, we have the assurance that there is something. We are promised that something. So there we have what we have. So just to end. So on that day, almost 2,000 years ago, death for the first time experienced defeat for that first time in history and yield to the true champion of the ages, our risen King, Jesus Christ. And because he truly was resurrected from the dead, we have this hope too. And listen to this hope too, that death is not the end for those who trust in him. Are those comforting words? Death is not the end for those who trust in him. Amen. There we go. Boys and girls, you can go back to your parents now.